Now.
Gotcha.
So if you can start by saying and spelling your name for me, and if you can give me your title.
Yeah, sure. My name is Joseph Scott Morgan. That's Joseph ScottMorgan. I'm the Distinguished Scholar of Forensic Investigations at Jacksonville State University, the former senior investigator with the Fulton County Medical Examiners in Atlanta, and investigator with a coroner in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Okay. Okay. So we're talking about the Caleb Collins case here, the 1-year-old toddler that was missing, and the sheriff's office believes that they have found human remains at the family property that they believe to be Caleb. Can you kind of just start by telling me a little bit of what you were just saying about the details that go into determining that there's human remains and that they're kind of talking about it being adjacent to the burn pile, things like that, how that would come about?
It's like trying to piece together a jigsaw puzzle that's in more particulate pieces than a regular jigsaw puzzle. And to boot, uh, if these remains have been uh, subjected to thermal injuries, and I'm talking about in the postmortem state, that makes it even more difficult to kind of piece everything together. And that's one of the reasons they would have called a forensic anthropologist out to the scene because, things that you and I look at might just look like a piece of charcoal or a rock. But for the trained eye with a forensic anthropologist, they can see things that we can't see because this is what they do for a living. And just simply because you find human remains uh, in a burn pile does not necessarily mean that they are linked to a specific person. Now, investigators are probably very hopeful that that's the case because they can have more understanding about how they're going to pursue the investigation. So those remains, which are found there, would go to a forensic anthropology lab, and they're going to be studied in a variety of different ways, including microscopically. And they're going to look for a couple of things, what's called the morphology of the bone, which first off, you have to understand what anatomical element of the human remains that particular piece of fragmented bone might be from. You can have from the skull, have it from shoulder blade, you can have it from sternum. You don't know. And then they're going to look for signs of any kind of trauma to these remains. Now, we do know that this precious little angel that they're talking about has been missing since September. My suspicion is this far out, it's going to be very, very difficult to make a determination about the cause of death. It has nothing to do with the manner. There's 5 manners of death. They can classify it in one of those, traditionally accident, homicide, natural, suicide, all those sort of undetermined. But the causal factors are going to be much more difficult to assess. And in my experience, relative to bodies that have been exposed to extreme heat, um, there's generally a motivation on the part of the perpetrator. Number one is to try to destroy any evidence. And a default position for many people that are involved in these sorts of things is they think that fire will get rid of all evidence. And it doesn't necessarily happen that way. And that's the route they're going to have to go down. The big question is, I think, you have to be able to determine when the remains would have been placed adjacent to the burn pile or in the burn pile. Because if you have an individual that has been missing for a prescribed amount of time, and it's been mentioned September, all right, here we are the next year, we're in May now. That's many, many months, right? So you cannot definitively say that the remains were in that burn pile for that entire amount of time. You don't even know if the individual was deceased over that same period of time. So there's a lot that they're having to make their way through with in this particular case.
And one thing that you talked about was they've not determined that this is Caleb. So
Hmm.
when you hear the sheriff's office say that they believe it is Caleb, where do you think
Right.
that confidence is coming from?
Well, what I'm thinking is that if they have, there's certain things a forensic anthropologist would make note of, and when we're developing as young ones, um, our bones, our skeleton, let's say that, looks completely different when we're one. Okay. As a matter of fact, many people don't realize that babies are actually born with more bones than than adults have. All right, because you have this fusion thing that's going on as they develop. So, you look at uh, various elements of like the long bones, and you see where the plates have not fused, for instance. If there's any evidence of that, the forensic anthropologist is immediately going to think, per their assessment, that, okay, this fits within a specific bracket, okay? That this is not someone that is of great age. It might very well be somebody that fits within the parameters of the individual we're looking for. So you've got that bit that's going for you, and that's very generalized and broad. My suspicion is they are going to attempt to try to find a biological element associated with those remains in that burn pile, and they're going to try to extract DNA. And that's the surefire way. Because even if you find teeth, for instance, these are going to be what are referred to as deciduous teeth, what grandma used to call milk teeth or baby teeth. Deciduous teeth, that means that they're just kind of sitting on the surface. You don't have your permanent teeth in yet. And that's not really going to tell you a lot. When you're looking from a dental aspect of wear patterns and restorations, that doesn't exist. So they're going to be heavily reliant upon an extraction of DNA. And back to teeth, teeth are the ultimate, the ultimate element in the human body for preservation of DNA, particularly when it comes to events involving intense heat. We extract DNA from the pulp within the tooth, and that requires quite a bit of training and understanding how to do it. So it's going to be all hands on deck on this case. I can tell you that all of the forensic scientists are going to be working overtime on this case just to get these remains identified.
And do you know about how long that could possibly take, a process and, you know, positively identifying or, figuring out the DNA there?
Uh, it will move at the pace. Well, the first obstacle that you have to overcome is going to be can they find DNA to extract? Okay, again, you're talking about elemental changes. This is not like you're talking about a body that has been casketed and buried in a vault. Okay, you're talking about a body that has been maybe, we don't know perfectly yet, may have been exposed to extreme heat, the elements, and we all know how intense our weather here is in Alabama. It's going to impact um, the remains that are there on the surface. Um, if they can't extract the DNA, the one thing they're going to have to do is they're going to have to get a DNA sample, preferably from mama or daddy, and they'll do what's referred to as a buccal mucosal swab, where they go in and scrape the inner portion of the mouth, and they will take that DNA and compare it to the unknown DNA that they've retrieved from the question remains and see if they get a match there. And if they do, that's you can take that to the bank. It's gold.
And do you think that is there any way, if these remains were burned, to determine if the person was alive or dead at the time they're burned? I mean, I know that's probably
That
substantial.
No, that's an excellent question because you begin to look at something like burning, and that's a big question that you have. With intact remains, one of the biggest signs that we look for relative to those that have been subjected to fire, for instance, in like a house fire, um, the exterior of the body is, in many cases, is extremely damaged. But when we do an autopsy, we're able to appreciate what's in the airway specifically and what's in the lungs. Okay. And we can also do things like blood draws where we check, there's a standard blood draw that's called a carboxyhemoglobin level. And that actually measures the amount of carbon monoxide that someone takes in. But the big problem here is that I would imagine, and I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine, given the time and given these circumstances, remember burn pit, I'd be very surprised if there was any soft tissue left. And that includes internal organs. So it's going to be an uphill battle for them. And again, that goes back to, I think, one of the big questions. Um, how did, if it is this child, how did this precious baby die?
And I did speak with the sheriff on Friday and I asked him the question if he could explain what it looked like. And he said that it was very, very small. And I said, so would I have been able to determine, which I have no knowledge of any of that. But I
Mm,
was like, if I were to look at it, would I know that it was human remains? And he said no.
yeah,
So, knowing that, is there, how burned do you think it had to be?
pretty significantly, I would imagine. And um, I've covered in the media, I've covered, and as a practitioner, I've worked a lot of cases. It's reminiscent for me, um, two, two cases in particular. The Grimstead case, who was the beauty queen in Georgia that went missing all those years ago, and they found very little of her remains. And that was a pretty infamous case. And of course, case out of Idaho involving the Daybells, where one of those children was actually rendered down, or there was a half-hearted attempt to render her down by fire. Um, if with in Terrace case over in Georgia, there was nothing left. And the thing about thing about subjecting bodies to fire like this is that fires have to be tended. Okay, it's not like you. Many people, I think, labor under this idea that you simply pour gallon of gasoline on something, strike a match, and walk away. It doesn't work like that. Fire actually has to be tended and stirred and turned. You have to add more fuel, that sort of thing. And gas is not a fuel, gas is an accelerant. So you would have to place things that are flammable, like wood. In the Grinstead case, they continue to uh, put pecan wood because it was in a pecan orchard and it's one of the hottest burning woods. It's right up there with hickory. It's one of the hottest burning woods. But you look at the case out in Idaho that I covered for years, and that case in particular, there was not a lot of effort put into it, and that those remains were actually buried adjacent to where animals had been buried, like their pets and that sort of thing. So a lot of it depends upon what they have out there. If you've got a sheriff that's saying that just to eyeball it and you can't make it out whether or not it's human remains, you have to think that charring is extensive. There's not going to be a lot left. I hope that there is. I pray that there is, but this is going to be quite extensive. And the thing about it is, if this is a 1 year old, their bodies are so incredibly fragile that the rendering down is going to be very, very destructive to anything of evidentiary value, I would think. Yeah.
Okay, is there anything that I didn't ask that you think is important to add about this case?
I don't think so, Gracie. I not off the top of my head. I think that that's pretty much it. Those drone shots that you sent me in that article are really cool. We had those in Idaho as well, and take a real close look at them because you can appreciate the amount of activity around there, how frequently it's used, perhaps. You know, do people go set fires and sit around a campfire and play guitar and drink beer? You know, that sort of thing. You know, is it a well-used area? So, um, but beyond that, I don't really know anything else that really jumps to mind.
Okay, I think that was great. Thanks so much for being willing to do this today. It was nice speaking with you.
Yeah, come on over and see us sometime at JSU. See our crime scene house
I
and our
will. I would love
and
to.
our and our cadaver lab.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, run
Okay.
on over. All right, Gracie, y'all
Right.
have a good day.
Thanks.
Is